Thank you for this opportunity. My name's Scott, representing Terra Architects. This project was from the education section, but importantly it's about educating about sustainability. But what is that and what do we teach? Sustainability is really difficult. We all flew here, we tick that box. Towers get LEED ratings, but is that sustainability? So in this space, experiments are needed to learn from and to inspire the students that will visit this facility that this is an experiment in building from rubbish on a rubbish tip. The project's real, it's got council approved funding, it's got planning consent and documentation starts next year. It's also very cheap, 5 million Singapore dollars. It's part of the Yuin Nation, a beautiful part of the south coast of New South Wales, one of the best areas in Australia for its pristine beaches and these beautiful mountain ranges. But it's a catastrophic area. This Shoalhaven area was subject to extreme floods, extreme fire 4 years ago. That actually forced people down onto those beaches, and floods 2 years ago. So not so coincidentally, this area is very focused on sustainability. The existing Nowra Waste Centre is a leader in on-site recycling and upcycling. Every tip has their specialties. Who knew it? They sort, they sort of separate. And this tip has one of the sort of key things going on, which is glass and ceramics gets crushed. So they've built these sort of special, almost mad Willy Wonka machines to crush and process things. Here, contaminated glass is crushed into sand for reuse. The project site is at the entry to the waste centre. It's on the original dumping ground that is profoundly contaminated here in the foreground, at a time where we just used to pile our rubbish in the ground and bury it over. As the entry to the waste centre is also the entry point for these really large noisy trucks that come past. Given this, the project has 4 key moves. This outer wall that will protect the kiddies from the trucks piling in, the boxes for the program, really tight and efficient sort of planned, and these pergola structures to the external areas. And of course, a landscape that will in itself decontaminate the site over time. It's a simple plan. Students will sort of come in through a slip in the wall, and there's a reception information centre on the left. There's learning areas to the right, including a little model recycling plant where the kids can learn from recycling by separating bottles from rubbish. And an office area in the smaller box over to the left. But I'm not really going to talk more about the building, about how it works as an experiment in circularity and as a pedagogic model. In starting the project at a waste centre, the question was in finding materials to make the 3 key build elements from, opposite to the way a normal project is commenced, which might be focused on shape making, for example. So the project features every sort of material reuse, recycling, and upcycling. And of course, that landscape remediation, a slow project of addressing the contaminated site over a long time. We work closely with our consultants, Atelier 10, who overlaid this sort of leveraging of material reuse and enmeshed it with environmental performance. Interestingly, we were asked yesterday in our presentation about whether doing such a project has changed how we work as an education project in itself. This process of letting aesthetic, spatial decisions fall out of a circularity approach as opposed to form-making approach is already landed in our office. This is our new office that we moved in after 2 decades in another office. It was in an 1850s building. We found this 1960s fit-out and made a new fit-out from what we found, literally. The only thing we added was the new electrical cabling. It led to spatial and material detailing decisions we would not normally make, making on the run with what we had. But results in a fit-out that talks not of the novelty of architectural idea, but carries stories about the past and the potential of the future. So the project has this loose, almost imprecise collection of elements that are brought into focus through material choices that result from a very stubborn approach to circularity. I'll now run through how these permeate through the 3 key elements: wall, buildings and pergola. The Gabion wall here used crushed rock, brick and concrete, layered to show these rock types, crushing regimes, all a learning experience. And locating specific items with supporting information to tell a specific story, such that the building is not a box that learning happens in, but is of itself a learning machine. It also supports different scale of learning and configurations on the inside, from larger groups over to the left to smaller groups on the sort of the right. And importantly to us, there's a poetry in this being a visible part of the big pile of rubbish that it actually sits on and extends far below the layer of grass. In essence, the wall is the tip of a rubbish iceberg. Working with circularity means rolling with the punches and what is available, and it's a constantly evolving program for this project. For example, as we started the project, they had demolished a timber wharf nearby and taken all these beautiful old timbers to the rubbish dump. And so we turned it into the pergola structure, and car exhaust here down on the bottom right will be turned into handrails and balustrades throughout, and who knows what else. This forces a dilemma in traditional construction procurement. We've got a 10% contingency in our budgets already. The facade features a major innovation project already underway between the rubbish dump, who are working with the University of New South Wales. A product they have developed on site, crushed glass and ceramics. Normally made from the type of waste glass and textiles that are traditionally not subject to recycling. This is due to issues such as contamination and material complexity in their makeup. We're using it to make these facade panels and also in a sort of thicker format for the floor panels throughout. It's really hard to represent as to who knows what will happen on the day when one stubbornly uses whatever is available to use and also leaves out whatever can be left out. There's 12 months since design started and a little under 12 months before construction's planned to start. A lot evolves over that period. Windows will be recycled polycarbonate roofing. Who knows what profile they will be or even what colour they will be. This is the aesthetics of sustainability, not some perfect image of louvers or solar panels, but a messiness and a contingency of what is available and what can be reused. What we can't control is what is available at the time. Fabric insulation and curtains will be reused. The fabric insulation doubles as an acoustic lining, avoiding the use of secondary linings internally. Now to the pergola. It's a key feature that announces the entry and inside orders these outdoor learning spaces. These lifting straps are coloured by weight rating in Australia and also reuse. These purple ones have a capacity of 1 tonne and can quite often only be used once. They are filling these skip bins on site. Interestingly, many of these lifting straps have been used in construction of mass timber projects, of which we've been part of ourselves, so it's a learning exercise in that. The aesthetics of sustainability again. Would we choose purple? No, probably not. Gerard, my business partner, paced the office for 2 weeks saying we're not having a purple pergola and look for any other colour strap that in the end we could use. But in the end we sort of agreed that we have to follow the aesthetics of sustainability, not style. They're purple, so part of this design strategy for maximum reuse is simply accepting that. And here's more tests of them underway. So overall, it's a formally simple object, but rich in detail and material, and very layered and nuanced as a pedagogic project, a machine for learning about circularity. This simplicity can be replaced then by another image, one that contains a lot of material complexity and nuance and happenstance and contingency. So as architects, we draw these clean sections and elevations. But probably a better drawing of the building is this one that shows the whole project is made from materials that are dumped in the waste centre or sourced really close nearby. And so to finish on the question of carbon calculation, and a lot of work has been done in this forum. To give an example, it's very low, but there's still traps for us. 800 kilograms per square metre is good. 400 to 600 is best in class. 60 that we're targeting is off the scale amazing. At the moment, we're currently at 203, largely due to the steel in the gabion baskets. If we can resolve the steel in those gabion baskets in the next 12 months or so, we will achieve target. But overall, as an experiment, we think this sort of project provides a way out from a fake sustainability that permeates our industry at the moment and points to new methods that might genuinely take us to carbon zero, as opposed to net zero, whatever that means. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me jump in. Thanks for provoking a lot of our commonplace thinking about sustainability. It would be helpful if you could just describe, we understand the building as the model and as a system unto itself that's, teaching, but what actually happens in the spaces? I'm not quite sure you said that.
Yep, sure. So typically the students, it's typically for school groups, there's an education process already underway with council at this resource centre. They just don't have the facilities to support that. So typically the children will, I'll just go back to a plan, will probably go for a a trip on a bus through the actual waste resource centre and then come back to the facility. They'll then sort of exit and enter and slip through the building. And the first building on the left here is really probably more a static information session. It's sort of information building. It's where they sort of can be retold stories of what they've just seen. They can then move across this sort of undercover pergola over to the larger building, which is really a sort of multi-use facility. At the back of that is this sort of area where they can practice their own recycling, which is really important for teaching them the effort that required at home is far little less than the efforts that are required on these sites. So it's a really informative process. And then there's sort of a larger sort of outdoor area under that larger pergola. You can see there that looks out over the waste centre. So it sort of returns back and they can teach. We've got to keep them off the site. The site's incredibly contaminated. So there's a sort of a raised level all throughout. And then the sort of admin staff have their own little sort of office building just over to the left, somewhat tucked out of the way.
Thanks. You made a comment about the kind of loose fit and casual nature of it. And yet, you chose the circle, a pure form.
Yep.
And rectilinear, let's face it, carefully composed elements within. Can you describe the relationship of all of that, the compositional strategy?
Yeah, definitely. The circular form is for strength and simplicity of detailing. So if we can get one junction right, it curves around. It's also the minimum area we need for the enclosing wall. So it's a real sort of effort in sort of leanness. Likewise, the buildings are incredibly lean. They're simple, square, rectangular sort of formats. And yes, we say they sort of look sort of slightly dishevelled, but they are very precise in terms of the efficient spaces we need for sort of generally that circulation outside of them and the way the outdoor spaces are used as part of the education process. Yep.
Absolutely brilliant presentation. Thank you. It's really inspiring. I've got a question that's kind of about the process. So I love this idea that you don't know exactly what it's going to look like because you don't know exactly what's going to be there.
Yep.
How does that work with the processes we have to go through, like the Australian equivalents of planning and building control? Because if you don't know what the wall's going to be made out of, how do you get any kind of sign-off short of having someone standing over you on site?
Yeah, really challenging. Partly that's why there'll at least be a minimum of 10% contingency in the contract sum. We're constantly sort of learning and then they're putting things aside. So the timber that arrived, that's been put aside. In the last few months, there's been news of a hospital demolition. And so we're currently looking into that to sort of gain information, materials out of that we can sort of reuse. So I think as we start documentation after Christmas, by the time we go to that sort of formal tender that these local governments have to go through, there will be a general sort of tightness to the project. But there still needs to be that agility, that sort of on-site representation.
But I mean in terms of performance, like how are you going to know how your facade is going to perform thermally if you don't know what it's made out of yet?
Well, we have tested a lot of that. So the facade panel is actually been developed. That's that sort of partnership that they've already got going with the University of New South Wales. The insulation material has already been developed and sort of tested. It's probably sort of more looking for better opportunities is what we'll sort of be targeting. So the building is complete. We know we've got the sort of material to do this. They've got the rubble and so forth. But it's that constant searching to go better, I think.
Amazing.
I really appreciate the strategy of using existing materials. And I think what could be interesting is how can we think about changing scale, moving from such a building, which is pretty much, relatively small scale to something, much bigger.
Yep.
And also, one thing I find interesting is the fact that, besides the building systems, is there a strategy for, let's say, utilities, plumbing, electricity that also function in the same fashion?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of work going on, particularly with the sort of Atelier 10 to minimise that. The student spaces, the information building and the large sort of classroom building with sort of recycling, they're all naturally ventilated. That actually means this sort of odour coming from the waste recycling centre is just going to permeate. It's part of the education process to explain to the children this is real. The small office building does have to have some mechanical systems, particularly because it gets so hot here. Not necessarily for heating, but for cooling. So we're currently developing sort of all those systems. There's wastewater recycling. We're looking at whether we can sort of capture the rainwater and store it, all those sort of types of things. So it's still an evolving sort of process. I think that's one thing that we're definitely sort of targeting.
And in terms of scaling up eventually?
Yeah, look, it's our challenge. We sort of, in a way, did this project and sort of learnt so much and were inspired. And almost by happenstance, we did this new office. After 20 years in an old office, we moved. And it was just a sort of fantastic opportunity to show it at the micro scale. We're definitely interested in how this translates. We're doing a large, or reasonably large, mass timber building. And I think some of this information has permeated into that. We've now done a research project on the back to think how far could we stretch the carbon? What if we do more columns and less floor structure and those types of things? So it's an area that the practice is getting into that we probably wouldn't have envisaged going into, and it's really exciting as a sort of a new territory, I suppose.
Got a question about the surroundings of the building. As much as you talk about a lot of it being very messy, yes, yet the area around the building looks like almost not a perfect lawn, but almost untouched. Can you talk a little bit about that relationship with the edges and how, in relation to how contaminated the area is?
Look, that's a future vision image. At the moment, it's sort of rolling grass that's sort of literally just grass over the top of a really heavily contaminated site. They used to just dump all the waste into the ground and cover it over and keep moving out. So the actual waste centre is sort of further out from the approach. But there is a sort of a serious regeneration sort of project going on that these sort of these plantings around the building will actually over time help decontaminate the site underneath. But it's a really busy, the trucks sort of come down the hill, turn around. The gabion wall is as much for safety as anything. If one of those trucks gets out of sort of control and there's students in here, so it's very much sort of a safety mechanism as anyway. But brought out to the real entry point of the site, which I think is really important to show this prominence of a facility that sort of probably is operating out of a very, very small sort of unit somewhere sort of deep within the complex already. So.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.